Hi, and welcome back to the Lifestyle School podcast. I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered how your body actually reacts to food? How much of an impact does that heavy carb meal have on your blood sugar? Or do those simple glucose hacks actually work that you hear about on the internet? Well, I wanted real answers. So for 30 days, I wore a continuous glucose monitor, also known as a CGM, to track how my blood sugar responded to everything, what I ate, when I ate, and how I exercised. And then even small habits like drinking vinegar before meals. And let me tell you, it was an eye-opening experience. So in today's episode, I'm going to break it down for you what I learned, including the glucose hacks that actually worked to lower my blood sugar, how just one blood sugar spike can actually keep your glucose elevated for a day or longer, why even whole food carbs like rice, sweet potatoes could be causing big glucose spikes for you, and then what I realized about my body and how insulin resistance plays a role in all of this. So by the end of this episode, you're going to have a real actionable strategies to help you stabilize your blood sugar, avoid energy crashes, and my hope is that you will feel so much better throughout your day. And before we get started, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. I want to remind you that the information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. I always want you to consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making significant changes to your diet, exercise routine, or lifestyle. So, with that, blood sugar isn't just something that people with diabetes need to think about or potentially even worry about because it plays a major role in our energy levels, our cravings, which we've been talking a lot about over the last couple episodes. It affects our mood and even our long-term health. So, when your blood sugar is stable, you feel steady, you feel focused, feel more satisfied after meals. But when it spikes and then ultimately crashes, because we know what goes up must come down, you might notice things like tiredness or sluggishness after eating. You might feel irritable or have mood swings. Cravings for sugar or carbs are something that many people experience. And then, this plays into feeling hungry soon after eating, when in reality, you don't feel like you should actually be hungry. So for years, I had heard about different strategies of managing blood sugar. I have taught many different strategies for managing blood sugar, but I was really excited to see real data on how my body was reacting to the different meals that I was eating and these different lifestyle habits. So after multiple years of asking my husband if we could splurge on a continuous glucose monitor. I was gifted one for Christmas. So I decided to wear this CGM for 30 days to track my blood sugar in real time. It took my blood sugar every 5 minutes while I had the sensor on. And really, this experiment helped me understand exactly what was happening in my body and which habits were actually worth paying attention to. And so, my hope for you is that throughout this episode, you're going to get a really good understanding of how these glucose hacks work. And, if it's something that if you're not already doing it, maybe you should start incorporating these into your lifestyle. So, a little bit about me. I've always been super curious about blood sugar. For years, I would prick my own finger and test my blood sugar with, just a little on the go glucose monitor. And I was especially interested in this because I have dealt with insulin resistance in the past. And, while I had a pretty good idea of what foods worked for me, I wanted to see how my body was really responding to different meals, the different times of day that I was eating, and my activities. So going into this experiment, I assumed I had a solid handle on my diet and blood sugar control, but when I really started to analyze the data, I would say it was an eye-opening experience. So here are some of the things that I thought were really interesting, and we'll dive into deeper in a little bit. But even whole food carbs like rice, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, they were spiking my blood sugar more than I expected. Um, Another thing that was really shocking is one or more, large blood sugar spikes throughout my day. And I'm talking like a spike probably between 40 to 60 points would affect my glucose levels for 24 hours or even longer after they happened. And then lastly, some of the simplest habits like meal order, walking, vinegar made a huge difference. And I've always believed in the power of stabilizing blood sugar, but seeing this hard data confirmed just how big of an impact these small changes can truly have. So let's break it down. So let's get into some of my biggest takeaways from this 30-day experiment, which I have alluded to. And I learned so much about food movement and small lifestyle tweaks how they directly impact our blood sugar. But one of the most exciting things I discovered is that the simplest of glucose hacks actually work. And it was just really fun to test them out and see them working in real time. So there's three major tricks that I want to talk about, which I tested. And the first one is the order in which you eat your meal. So one of the things that, I have preached for a long time, I've seen a lot of data to support this. People have tested this out, and it's something I truly try to implement, but is eating your protein, your fiber, and your fat first before having starchy carbohydrates. And what I noticed when I was wearing my continuous glucose monitor is that whenever I ate my protein and my fat and my fiber before my carbs, my blood sugar spike was dramatically lowered compared to when I ate carbs first. So I don't know if you've ever, been prepping a meal for your family or even just yourself, and you quick, have some chips while you're prepping your food because you're hungry and you're, feeling like you just need a little something. Well, I did this multiple times while wearing my CGM, and the blood sugar spike was significantly higher, even though, I shortly after ate that protein. And, I want to kind of explain why does this actually work? So, protein, fat, and fiber, they slow down our digestion. And what this does is it delays the breakdown of carbohydrates into glucose through the digestion process. So instead of like a huge surge of glucose hitting the bloodstream all at once, it's released more gradually. So this prevents large glucose spikes, which ultimately result in a big glucose crash. And this is going to help stabilize not only your blood sugar, but also your hunger cues and your energy. So some examples of this would be one day, I had chicken and vegetables with rice, and I tried eating the rice first, and my blood sugar spiked significantly quicker, and it stayed elevated, for the next hour or two after. And and another day, I did the same thing, but I had the rice at the end of the meal, and the glucose spike was much lower and it came down much faster. So when it comes to, putting our meals together, it's not necessarily wrong to have carbs with your meal, but just be strategic about where you put them. They should always be the last thing you eat. And that's going to make a huge difference when it comes to your glucose response. The second glucose, honestly, I hate the word hack, but that's the word I'm using, is walking after meals to help stabilize your blood sugar. And honestly, this makes a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of data to support walking after meals helps stabilize blood sugar. But it was really, really cool to see this happen in real time. So I went on a date with my husband during this experience, and I purposely got a sandwich and, had two slices of bread with it. It was delicious. It was from Montecito Farms, if you've ever eaten there. great sandwiches, but my blood sugar started to spike. I could see it, going up as my CGM was taking my glucose every 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, we're done eating. Like, let's go for a walk and let's see what my blood sugar does. So we went for a walk around the area that we were with the restaurants. And honestly, we were not walking very fast. But we walked for 10 minutes. And as soon as we started walking, like my next glucose reading, again, 5 minutes in, was like the trend was going straight, like back down, which was awesome to see. And so doing something, like walking after dinner. My parents, they live in Minnesota. It's, today or yesterday was -40. So maybe walking outside isn't necessarily something that you can do super easily, depending on the climate that you live in or where you live. But, what they've done is they have played ping pong after their meals. So they're just trying to do something to be moving, to be active. And, I think that's super fun. They're also having a great time and they're connecting relationally. So movement after meals is a really powerful tool. And the reason why this is our muscles are sinks for glucose. So you can think of them as sinks to hold glucose. So when we move our muscles, what this does is it takes glucose out of our bloodstream and it can store it in our muscles as glycogen. And this really helps take some of that pressure off of our bloodstream. So if we have, muscle, and this is another reason why it's important to build muscle, the more muscle you have, the more glucose your muscles can hold to be used for energy within the muscle later. And that excess glucose then doesn't have to be floating around and then going to be stored as fat. So less glucose in your bloodstream means lower insulin levels and more fat burning potential. So, moving on to number 3, is the use of vinegar before meals and how that works to blunt blood sugar spike. So this is one that I feel like is maybe a little bit more controversial than like the foods that you eat in a certain order and then walking after meals. But I have for years now had some apple cider vinegar prior to like starchy meals that I would eat. And I wanted to see how this worked with my continuous glucose monitor. And so, how does this work? Well, the acetic acid in vinegar slows down the digestion of the starches, meaning sugar enters our bloodstream more gradually instead of all at once. It improves our insulin sensitivity, which helps our body process glucose more efficiently. And so I tested this just by taking 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. You can really use any vinegar as long as it's not malted. Like you don't want to use something like balsamic vinaigrette or vinegar that's not going to work as well. But apple cider vinegar has some other beneficial properties as well. So that's what I use. I also think it tastes the best, but you dilute it in some water and you drink it about 10 to 15 minutes before a meal that's going to have carbohydrates in it. And it seemed to work based on what I could see with my continuous glucose monitor. So, it's such an easy little thing that you can do prior to a meal where, like I went out for sushi with a friend and I knew I was going to have some carbohydrates. So before we left, I just had, 6 ounces of water with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. And I knew that was going to be helping me, process these carbohydrates better so I wouldn't have as much of a blood sugar crash. Moving on from the hacks, another thing that I found super interesting as I was observing my body with the continuous glucose monitor is that on days where, I was purposefully testing, like how does my body respond to this food and things, noticing that, I had a couple of glucose spikes today based on what I was doing. I noticed that even one blood sugar spike, so again, I'm talking over 30 points. Usually my glucose spikes weren't any bigger than like 60 to, I think the highest spike I had was 73 points, which is decently high, but obviously I'm non-diabetic. So if you're diabetic listening to this, you're gonna be like, oh, maybe that's nothing. But for me, that's pretty significant. And I will say just in general, we don't want to be spiking our blood sugar more than, 30 points because there's going to be negative consequences that come with that. But what I recognize is that if I was spiking my blood sugar, my baseline blood sugar stayed elevated for anywhere from 24 to 48 hours after that spike. And I found that actually really concerning because we don't want extra glucose chilling in our bloodstream. And the reason why this is because chronically elevated blood sugar leads to increased inflammation. It leads to insulin resistance, which is going to make it harder for our body to use glucose efficiently. And this is something that I have dealt with for years. And if you're prone to insulin resistance, maybe you have a family member who has type 2 diabetes. This is really something of concern. And then also elevated blood sugar levels in your bloodstream damage your blood vessels and your cells. So it's going to make your cells have to work harder to produce energy. It's going to damage your mitochondria, which are the little engines that make your 20 to 30 trillion cells be able to go around your body and do their job. When we want our body to be able to work as efficiently and effectively as it can, and when we have excess glucose in there, it's going to make things a lot harder. So, it made me rethink the like, oh, one big meal or one day of enjoying as many treats or carbs as I want isn't that big of a deal. Honestly, it made me kind of rethink this. And this is something I've been thinking about. We just this last weekend had Valentine's Day. I also had my husband's birthday. So I did indulge in some birthday cake and ice cream. And I found I did a 48-hour fast Monday to Tuesday. And I was measuring my ketones, seeing, how long is it going to take me to get my body back into ketosis? And I was 48 hours into a fast and I was barely into nutritional ketosis. And what that tells me is my body just has all this excess glucose hanging around that it's utilizing, that it doesn't actually need to produce ketones until 48 hours into not eating anything other than, coffee and tea and drinking water with my electrolytes. So that is something I think if you kind of wrap your head around that, especially if you've dealt with insulin resistance in the past, it's going to make you rethink those cheat meals, cheat days, however you want to put them. I don't really like to think about there being like foods that are off limits. But I heard like someone say one time on a podcast, honestly, I don't remember who it was, but she said, everything is permissible, but not everything is worth it. And I think that's a really good mindset to have. It's like, yeah, I can have this cake, but is it worth it? For me, this last weekend, having some of the gluten-free carrot cake that I made from scratch for my husband felt worth it. But, this weekend, it's not going to be worth it to do it again. I'm heading up to San Francisco in a couple days to show my bonus sister the city. Is it going to be worth it to go to my favorite gluten-free bakery? Honestly, based on what I've seen with my continuous glucose monitor, probably not. And so it's just making me rethink how I think about my blood sugar spikes because, I want to take my cellular health really seriously. I don't want to be inflamed. I've had chronic back issues for the last 3 years that have been really frustrating to deal with. And I want my blood vessels, my heart health to be optimal. And I can't do that if I have excess glucose hanging out in my bloodstream. Moving on, another thing that I thought was really surprising is how whole food carbs. So I'm talking rice, white potatoes, and sweet potatoes specifically. I've been gluten-free for the last 15 years. So I can't, do a whole lot of different bread or other grains. But it was really interesting to me to see that, wow, like my body can't really deal with these whole food carbs very well that are very starchy and high in carbohydrates and low in fiber. And I was talking to a client a couple weeks ago. She also has dealt with insulin resistance and has had really great success with my program. But similarly to me, she's realized, if I want to feel my best, if I don't want to be bloated, if I want my energy to be good, if I want to be producing ketones at all, I have to eat pretty low carb, not ultra low, but decently low carb. And, I think to be totally honest, that can feel frustrating because it's like, I want to be able to have cake and I want to be able to have sweet potato fries because I really enjoy them. But, The beautiful thing about information is that it gives us choice, and insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes are lifestyle diseases. They're lifestyle states that are controllable by our lifestyle. And so, my client and I, we were kind of lamenting to each other about just like the bummer that having insulin resistance is. But at the same time, we were both, expressing our gratitude to the fact of like, this is totally within our control. It's not like I have a broken bone, which you have no control over. You just have to like wait for it to heal and resolve. It's, my daily choices are going to have a direct impact on the outcome of this condition or disease. And so that was something that was, I think, eye-opening with wearing this continuous glucose monitor, and something that I think is, just an important thing to think about and sit with is, everything is permissible. I don't like to say there's like foods that are off limits, but is it worth it? At the end of the day, what do I want more? A healthy heart, to have energy, to have a stable mood, or do I want French fries? It seems like it should be an easy decision, but honestly, it's not always because, a lot of these foods are extremely addictive. And, when it comes to making those decisions on the fly, it can feel like a slippery slope. So, one, really big takeaway from this whole experience with my continuous glucose monitor is that small changes truly do make a huge difference. And, these small little habits of walking after meals, always eating our protein first, having some vinegar before we have a more starchy meal, they can make a really big difference when it comes to our health, to improving our blood sugar management, to our energy, controlling our hunger and our cravings. And so, again, there's just a lot of beauty in the fact that we don't have to be perfect on this journey, but there's a lot of things that we can do to take control of our blood sugar management in a way that's not super expensive. And that is, I mean, honestly, pretty simple. So I want to answer now a couple common questions I get about blood sugar and insulin resistance. And so one of them is, how do I know if I have insulin resistance? And I think this is a great question because I think a lot of people don't really know. I would say the best way to know is, have a blood test done, have your fasting insulin taken. If it comes back over 5, you have some level of insulin resistance from a functional medicine perspective. But so some of the tall tale. I'm saying it wrong, but you know what I mean. Some of the signs that you may have insulin resistance is that you're constantly hungry, even after eating. This is a big one. So if you find yourself snacking every couple of hours just to keep your energy up, your blood sugar is likely on a roller coaster, and this is a big sign that you likely have insulin resistance. If you crave a lot of sugar and carbohydrates, if you feel like you need something sweet after a meal, maybe you get intense cravings for things like bread or pasta. This could be a sign that your body isn't handling glucose well. If you find that you have energy crashes after eating, like let's say you eat your lunch and then an hour or two later, you're like, oh my gosh, I need coffee. I need a nap. That is a sign that your blood sugar is crashing. This is something I dealt with for years and years and years, and I just thought it was normal, honestly. But this is a sign that you may have insulin resistance. If you have difficulty losing weight, especially around your midsection, insulin is your fat storage hormone. So if insulin is high, you're going to be storing fat, and your body's going to have a really hard time burning fat. So, if you have a hard time losing weight, I hate to say it, but you're likely insulin resistant. And I mean, honestly, I think the most recent studies, it's estimated that about 90% of Americans are metabolically dysfunctional. And then at least 1 in 3 Americans are insulin resistant. Typically, if you're metabolically dysfunctional, you have some level of insulin resistance. And so It's more likely than not if you are, struggling to lose weight and you feel like, you're just not optimal in your health that you have insulin resistance. And then if you have things like skin tags or darkened skin patches, this is a lesser known sign, but I actually it was talking to my dermatologist about it, about the connection between skin tags and skin growths and insulin resistance. And she said that, yeah, it's something that's really connected. And I think just, more recently, more and more data has been coming out about it. And honestly, I am prone to skin tags, so not something I love to admit, but I don't want skin tags. I don't know anyone who wants skin tags, especially if you're, a woman. And insulin resistance plays directly into that. So if you find that you have any of these symptoms, it's definitely worth paying closer attention to your blood sugar levels and trying some of these different strategies that we talked about earlier with the walking after meals, meal order, and the vinegar. Um, Another question I get is, can I improve my blood sugar control without wearing a continuous glucose monitor? And the answer is absolutely yes. Continuous glucose monitors are super helpful, but they're also very cost prohibitive. It's very expensive, which is why it took me more than 3 years to get one. It is really nice to get that instant feedback from a CGM. So if like you have an opportunity to get one, I think it could be super helpful. And because everyone reacts differently to different foods and habits, but you don't need one to start improving your blood sugar, today. The best way to tell if your blood sugar is stable is to pay attention about how you feel before and after meals. Like, do you feel satisfied and energized for hours after eating? That is a sign that your blood sugar is really stable. Or, just like we were talking about previously, do you feel hungry again an hour or so later? And are you having a lot of cravings? Are you really tired? That's a sign that your blood sugar is spiking and then crashing. So, you can experiment with the glucose hacks that we talked about and eat your protein first, walk, have movement after meals, and then use that vinegar and just see how you feel. And if your energy is more stabilized and your cravings decrease, it's a great sign that your blood sugar is starting to improve. Another question is, how long does it take to improve blood sugar and insulin resistance? And I'm going to say, it really depends on how insulin resistant you are to begin with, but many people see improvements in just a few weeks when they focus on lowering their glucose spikes and making smarter dietary changes. So, um, you will find that you have more stable energy within just a few days of reducing sugar and ultra processed foods and ultra processed carbohydrates specifically. Your cravings within a week or two are going to start to subside and kind of balance out as you work on having really nutrient dense meals that are really focused on protein, healthy fats, and then fibrous vegetables. And then your weight loss and metabolic flexibility is going to be better after a few months. So, you're going to start to feel better within just a few days, but some of the other things will take a little bit more time and dedication. And, if you do have severe insulin resistance for years, it may take a little bit longer to fully reverse. But the good news is that your body wants to be back into balance. And, if you give your body the right tools and the right nutrients, it can come back into remission. Although, you are going to have to be mindful about your decisions making like moving forward. If you reverse it and then go back to what you were doing previously, you're just going to get the same results that you always had. And then lastly, if whole food carbs like rice and sweet potatoes spike blood sugar, does that mean I can't eat them? And I want to say, not necessarily. Really, it depends on you, your individual insulin sensitivity, and truly your metabolic health. The more metabolically healthy you are, the more insulin sensitive you are, the better your body is able to put these sugars that you're eating to work. The problem is that most of us have just way too much sugar. I haven't looked at the number recently, but a number of years ago, when I looked it up, like the average American ate over like well over 50 pounds of refined sugar a year in their diet, the average American adult. And that is just like copious amounts of sugar. And so, for some people, whole food carbs like rice, quinoa, sweet potatoes, and even fruit are going to be perfectly fine because, they're really active, they're really sensitive to insulin, they have a good glucose efficiently. But for others, especially, those with insulin resistance, these foods can cause big spikes and crashes, leading to feeling super hungry, cravings, and then big energy dips. So, this is where personal experimentation is really key. If you want to include carbs into your diet, try pairing them with protein, fat, and fiber. That's going to slow down the glucose absorption. Eat them after a workout when your muscles are primed to use this glucose for energy. Test your energy and hunger afterwards. Really pay attention to how you feel. And they might work for you. And, if you feel sluggish and hungry after, I would say maybe they're not the best fit. For me personally, I have dealt with insulin resistance, and that's why it's something I talk about so much. I've realized that these higher carb foods just aren't really worth it for me on the day to day, but everyone is different. So I want to encourage you to experiment and find out what works best for you and where you're at on your journey. So, in closing, I hope that some of the things that we've talked about has answered some of your biggest questions about blood sugar and insulin resistance. And hopefully, you're going to walk away from this episode and feel like you have a good idea of some things that you can do to improve your glucose control naturally. And if you have more questions, I always love to hear from all of you. Send me a message on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Hope Plaque Coaching. I'd love to answer questions that you have in a future episode. And if you found this episode helpful, again, subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss an episode. So my big takeaways, just to wrap up from my 30-day CGM experiment, is that, your blood sugar matters more than we think. And this isn't just about preventing diabetes. It's about our energy, our hunger, our cravings, our mood, and even really our long-term health. And, I was able to see that these small habits do make a big difference. And, we don't necessarily need to start by overhauling our whole diet overnight and giving up, every carb that we love. But if we can start paying attention to how our body responds to food and make some strategic changes, we're going to feel the difference almost immediately. And over time, these are going to have a really big impact on our health and our blood sugar. So this week, I have a challenge for you. I want you to try one of these glucose hacks I shared today and see how it impacts your energy, your hunger, your cravings. And some of the options, again, I feel like we've talked about these ad nauseum a little bit, but, just think about when you're sitting down to eat your meal, what are you going to eat from your plate first? Are you going for your protein first? And if you're not, make sure you're switching that up and doing that, or your fibrous vegetables. And then just pay attention to how you feel afterwards. Try to move for 10 minutes after one of your meals during the day. See how that affects your energy. Try a little bit of apple cider vinegar, about a tablespoon in 6 to 8 ounces of water, and see if you notice any difference in your cravings afterwards. Just one of these, tools could make such a big difference when it comes to optimizing your blood sugar. So if you enjoyed this episode, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and listening. If you found anything helpful, share it with a friend. I would love that. Give us a 5-star review and then subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I try to have an episode out every week on Friday. And, if you're interested in learning more about what I do, you can check out my website at www.hopeplaquecoaching.com. I do have a course that dives deep into metabolic health, insulin resistance, blood sugar management, and that is in my course, Lifestyle School for Weight Loss. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I hope you found something valuable to take with you on your journey towards better health. And until next time, I want you to know that you've got this.